Applicants to management consulting. Glad to have you with us, or I guess with me and with the group for this little workshop. Excited to have you here. Before we kick off, wanted to quickly let you know that we at Leland have a management consulting bootcamp. These are short cohort-based courses that kind of go over the entire recruiting process end to end. So if you are interested in entering a giveaway for a free seat to our upcoming management consulting bootcamp, you can go ahead and enter here using that bit.ly link, or you can also use that QR code. Feel free to take a screenshot or take a photo. But yeah, if you're interested, you can enter that giveaway to win a seat. It's coming up in like 2 weeks. Perfect. And let's dive in. A little bit about me before we start talking about the reason you're all here for recruiting. I am a master's in biology turned management consultant. And I very recently lived in Houston. I just barely moved to Utah. I have 2 cats. I enjoy reading, baking, all things outdoors. And a little bit about my background. As you can see here, did a master's in biology. I was a fish biologist. I studied evolution and ecology. I did an intern at a startup in my state close by as an operations intern, and went from that background into consulting at McKinsey & Company. And I was there for 2 years as a business analyst and then a senior business analyst. And I point this out for 2 reasons. One, you look at my educational pedigree, I did not come from like an Ivy League. I didn't work at like a huge company before I went to McKinsey. And of course, I also did not have some sort of business major. And I point that out just because as a non-traditional applicant, it can feel like a lot of things are stacked against you. And more than anything, I think what I want to emphasize during this workshop is that your experiences are relevant, your experiences matter, and don't feel like you have to like shy away from those or lean away from those while you're recruiting. I think there's really compelling ways that you can use your experiences to draft a convincing story and recruit successfully. If you're interested in working with me, I am a coach on Leland, so you can go ahead and scan that QR code to look at my coaching profile. And you can also use my code LEJ20 for 20% off your first session. But you're also welcome to schedule like a 15-minute free intro call with me off of my coaching profile. I'd love to get to know you more, get to understand your goals, and help you break into consulting. And last thing here, this is a picture of me when I was a fish biologist, and I went from that to this, which was chat. I asked chat to generate an image of me as a management consultant, and that's what it popped up, which like fairly is not too far off. And this could be you. whatever boat or industry you're in right now, would be super excited to help you get into a management consulting role. So here's what we'll cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about intro to consulting for those who may not be super familiar with it. We'll talk about building a network, the actual application process, and we'll cover interview prep basics. And then hopefully we can save a bit of time at the end for some open Q&A. Last thing I want to quickly shout out is that I am sharing my screen right now, so I cannot see the chat feature for our video call. So if you do have a question, please like come off mute and ask it. I'll take time after each of these sections to pause and take any questions you might have. But if you are asking anything in the chat, I will not be able to see it until we get to our Q&A and I stop sharing the screen. Perfect. All right, intro to consulting. There are lots of different types of consulting. There's many places to be a consultant. But when a lot of people think about consulting, these top 3 firms, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG come to mind. That makes sense. They are the most well-known, they are the largest, they are the most global consulting firms. But one thing I want to highlight here is that they are just 3 of many great consultancies. There are lots of different consulting firms. They cover lots of different industries. Many are generalists like McKinsey, like Bain, like BCG. But there are also some that are industry specific. For example, Accenture, they do a little bit of like management consulting and generalist capacity, but they're also huge in tech. Booz Allen Hamilton, they do a lot of contracting with the government for defense. Clearview Healthcare Partners, they are a healthcare consultancy. So as you're thinking about where you want to apply for consulting, what firms you're interested in, I want to encourage you to cast a wide net for a couple reasons. One, there may be firms that you are excited about that you wouldn't have known about otherwise. I'm a firm believer that MBB is not necessarily like the end all be all. There are lots of other great tier one firms that you should consider. And the second is like you might have a background that is perfect for a more boutique firm. And third is MBB firms are incredibly competitive. I don't say this to be discouraging. I say this to be realistic. At McKinsey, for example, about 10 to 15% of applicants get interviews and 1% of applicants actually get offers. So it is very hard to land a role at an MBB firm. And if consulting is something you're interested in, I'd say that you need to be willing and excited about doing consulting at other firms, even if they're not MBB firms. And so I'd encourage you to cast a wide net, maximize your chances. When you're thinking about the types or the number of firms that you want to apply to, I'd say shoot for 7 to 10. Like really, truly cast a wide net, shoot your resumes places, see what lands, and hopefully it is an MBB one. Obviously that's very exciting, but there are others to consider. Deloitte, LEK, Oliver Wyman, PwC. These are all great firms where you can have like a really great high impact career and become a great consultant. So let's talk a little bit more about the recruiting process as a non-traditional applicant. The overall recruiting process will look generally the same regardless of how you're applying or what kind of background you're applying from. First step, I'd say this is your learn and network step. Second, you'll move to assembling your application. Third will be your interview prep. And four, you'll be interviewing. So within networking, two kind of pieces here. You'll want to build your network through LinkedIn outreach, scheduling coffee chats. You'll also want to connect with fellow applicants. Specifically for folks who are in school, I'd encourage you to attend recruiting events and info sessions that are typically hosted on campus. That's very common. When I was at BYU, again, BYU is not a target school, but when I was at BYU, like we had consulting events where you could go, you could talk to actual consultants at a variety of firms. We had MBB representatives there. We also had more boutique firms there. And it was great. This was super valuable for me to learn more about what the job was, kind of get my feet wet and get really comfortable networking in a live setting. That said, not all of networking will be done live. A lot of it will be done over Zoom, over email. And this kind of first phase of recruiting is very focused on building that network and expanding that network to include more consultants at firms that you're interested in. We'll go into depth on all of these things later, but just to quickly complete the rest of the overview, step 2 is assembling your application. So you'll want to know deadlines. Again, this is particularly important for folks in school as recruiting cycles tend to be more set for folks who are in an undergrad or an MBA program. During this phase, you'll also want to update your resume, write your cover letters, and a little bit in parallel, you'll also be doing interview prep. So you'll be practicing your case, behavioral interviews, as well as other types of screeners that some firms use, like games, case robots, Pymetrics. And you'll spend most of your time here. Interview prep takes time. And fourth, this last step, this is actual interviewing. So now you get to apply everything that you've been working on. This is assuming your resume was stellar, your cover letter was great. Now you're actually interviewing. So you will be going through those screeners, you will be doing phone interviews, and then you'll be doing your case and your behaviorals, and you'll land your offer. So let's talk a little bit more about building a network. First, why network? Lots of different reasons to network. One, this is a great way to obtain referrals, which can be critical for getting interviews at firms. You'll learn more about the firms and the people who work there. You can receive guidance and feedback as you're preparing for interviews. And a last point here, networking is a huge part of the job. If networking feels chronically uncomfortable to you, I would get super comfortable with it during this phase, and you will feel so much better once you're actually in the job. You are constantly meeting with clients. You are constantly meeting with partners at the firms that you work at. constantly meeting managers and like learning how to work with a team, and networking will just make those kinds of interactions so much easier, so much more effective, so much more natural. Big fan of networking. Networking was really uncomfortable for me when I first started. As a biologist, like networking was very different. You didn't kind of do a lot of cold outreach. You met people at conferences. So learning how to do this was stressful for me, but I got over it and it worked out great. And I was able to learn more about the firms that I was applying to and got great at interviewing through networking. There's different flavors of networking calls as well. So I'd say your first initial outreach will be these kind of get to know you calls. You'll reach out to consultants, whether that's people who are full-time consultants at firms or people who have internship offers or have just completed an internship at a firm. And you can use these to build your knowledge about firms and to establish initial relationships. During this phase, you will become a LinkedIn super user. You will master the art of the cold outreach. But there are ways to do this super effectively and make cold outreach a little bit warmer. One tip that I would recommend is reaching out to folks within your school, like alumni network. On LinkedIn, if you look at a company, you should have the option to view people at that company who went to the same school as you. And that's one way to say, like, hey, I am a current BYU student, or I am a BYU grad. I see that you are also a BYU alum. Would love to connect and learn more about your role at XYZ firm, or what you're doing, what kinds of industries or clients you're serving, and learn more about what you do. Easy peasy. You've just made a cold outreach way more warm. You've established a little bit of rapport and found some common ground just through something as simple as going to the same school as someone. That's one great way to become a LinkedIn super user. The other thing I'd note about get to know yous is you will likely not get a ton of responses. Well, you will get fewer responses to your emails than non-responses. And all that to say, people are not ignoring you. It's not that they're not interested in talking to you. I'd say 90% of the time, they just don't have time. So this is another place where it is a numbers game. You want to reach out to as many people as you can. You want to try to get calls the way that you can. At the same time, you do not want to sacrifice quality for quantity. And still make sure that these networking calls are genuine, they are kind, they are professional, and those things together kind of make them memorable. So let's shift to the next flavor of networking calls. You have application and interview prep. During this time, you are establishing relationships. You are going to get input and support on applications, mock interviews. And this is also the step where you can try to secure a referral if you don't already have one. Now, what a referral is it's basically exactly what it sounds like. It is someone at a firm who says, wow, Brian, you're great. I would love to recommend you to the recruiter or the recruiting team at my office if you're interested in applying. And it basically is just a way for someone to know that, like, hey, one of our people has talked to this guy and they think he's great. Assuming everything else passes, like, we'd love to interview him. Referrals are great. They're super great for kind of getting a boost when your resume goes in and kind of getting you to the top of the resume stack, so to speak. There is a bit of an art around securing a referral. You don't want to outright say, hey, Joe, I want a referral from you. There's ways to be a little bit more subtle about it, in the sense of, you could say, hey, it's been so great to learn more about McKinsey or Bain by talking to you. I'd be super interested in learning more and like actually being able to work at this firm while I'm interviewing. Do you have any advice or any tips that I could use to help make my application more successful? And if they like you and they think you're great, they'll probably say, hey, I'd love to refer you. That's the way to approach the referral. Should feel natural. It shouldn't be super like, hey, give me a referral. You want it to feel like it is not transactional. And that's an overall theme that's great for successful networking. It should not feel transactional. All right, last piece on networking, tips for success. I would start early. Schedule lots of networking calls, schedule them early, schedule them often. I spent, when I was recruiting, spent a lot of time on weekends, like Fridays, trying to schedule coffee chats and virtual meetings with folks while I was networking. I also kept a networking tracker, just like a simple Excel spreadsheet, so I could keep track of who I was chatting with, like what I had chatted with them about, or if I had followed up with them and they hadn't responded, how long it had been, so I could gauge if it was worth trying to follow up again or just let that lead go. Next tip on just facing the cold outreach. This is kind of a rip the Band-Aid off type of thing. It'll feel awkward. It will feel weird. And this is one of those things where you can prep a bunch for it, but sometimes you just have to go do it. For this sort of thing, I would probably recommend starting your first networking calls with folks who are either interning or like have an intern offer. Those kinds of calls can feel a little bit lower stakes. Since those folks tend to be students, they tend to be a little bit more open about things. They have a little bit more time, and it can feel like a safer kind of entry into networking, so you can feel fully ramped when you start reaching out to full-time consultants. Last tip would just be having a personal elevator pitch. Have like 30-ish seconds of intro to who you are, what your background is. So for mine, I talked a little bit about how I was a fish biologist and I studied this thing, but I was really interested in having impact in a different industry, in a different type of work. And that's why I was looking into consulting. And people were always like, who's this fish biologist? I think it kind of made things memorable. When I reached out to them again, they'd often be like, oh, she's a fish biologist. So it's fun to have a little personal elevator pitch that gives them something to remember you by, especially as you're trying to have like repeated interactions and build a relationship with these folks. So I'll pause here. Any questions about networking?
When you're talking about the elevation speech, we're talking about when we've already gotten them on the phone or the coffee chat, right? Or even
yeah, I think to some extent, yeah. But I also think it's helpful to have a version of your elevator pitch for your actual outreach. Something a little bit about you. I didn't often like lead with, I'm a fish biologist trying to become a consultant. That just felt like a little too like what's she doing? So for your initial outreach, it would probably be something more along the lines of how I mentioned, reaching out to people who may also be like alumni at the same school as you. It could be something like, hey, my name's Ellie. At least when I was recruiting, I said, hey, I'm a master's student at BYU. I'm studying biology, super interested in management consulting and plan to pivot following graduation. This is a space I'm trying to learn more about. I would love to grab 15 minutes of your time to learn more about what you do. Can be that simple. I'd keep it short, give a little intro on who you are, why you might have a connection with this person. That's kind of your email elevator pitch. And then once you're actually on the call, helpful to make it memorable by having maybe a little bit more detailed or a little bit more of a specific personal elevator pitch.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi.
I have a question about the overview that you gave. So, like when you're recruiting through school, there's a little bit more clear timelines. But
Yeah.
the timeline that you laid out, how does that typically look? Is that months? Is that weeks? What does it look like from, I guess, the networking to the submission all the way through to the offer?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is long, and I will say, like, maybe this is a bit of an unsatisfying answer, but it will vary from person to person. For example, and like also not to draw like generalities, but if I was a humanities major and I did not have a great quantitative skill set, I will need to prepare probably a little bit longer than someone who does have a more quantitative skill set, because I need to have a quantitative skill set and a very sharp one in order to be able to case effectively. From my personal experience, I was very gung-ho about interview prep for about 6 months. I'd say it's very common for folks to spend about a year prepping, but they're probably prepping a little bit more lightly. But I was like very in it when I was prepping for those 6 months up until interviews. So I guess that's kind of a high level on kind of how to gauge. I'd say it's great if you can start earlier rather than later, so that you can gauge where you maybe need to catch up, and then you have the time to make those adjustments and feel caught up. For folks who are in school, you typically have recruiting dates, and we'll get to this a little bit later as well. But when you are recruiting out of school, most firms will have like a set cycle for when they're hiring folks. And it's typically the summer before they would expect you to start. So in my case, I interviewed the June, July, August before the year before I actually got my offer and started work. And you can use those deadlines in order to kind of backtrack and figure out what your plan might look like. This is also something that's super helpful to work through with like a coach or a mentor who has experience in consulting. They can take a look at like your skill set. You can kind of share where you're at, and they can help you work backwards to figure out what a tentative plan might look like, so you can check all the boxes and feel interview ready.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I guess for folks who aren't in school, if you are an experienced hire who is applying from like a current position, typically firms don't have like deadlines for those kinds of roles. They're accepted more on a rolling basis. This isn't true across every firm ever, but generally true. And so for that, you kind of have a little bit more flexibility on how you want to apply or when. But in general, I would say like give yourself like several months of really dedicated prep time so you can feel confident. I think there was one more question that I'll take. Alrighty, I thought I heard someone, but if not, we will move along.
I guess I was going to ask, sorry to backtrack. I guess I was going to ask one question. When it comes to like reaching out to people on LinkedIn, I've actually been able to get somebody put me in touch with a recruiter. Is that too early, or should you do that when you feel like you're already ready to kind of apply? Because I definitely don't feel ready now. I'm still in like the research phase where I'm getting myself familiar with the interview format and everything. So I don't know if like being like talking to a recruiter too early kind of could be like a liability in a sense.
Yeah, I don't think so. And this is a great question. I'm glad you asked it. When we think about recruiters in pretty much any other industry, you're thinking of like, oh, this is someone who will like help prep me for the job, and they're going to screen me a little bit, and they're going to try to set me up. And maybe they're not the interviewer themselves, but they're super close with the person who will be interviewing. And I would say by and large, that is not the case with consulting. A recruiter does not interview you. They are not even directly like tied to the recruiting process, aside from the fact of being a resource for information, for recruiting, for interviewing. So in this case, I don't think it's a liability to chat with a recruiter. They can help get you connected with resources that can help you prepare. If there's info sessions that the firm's hosting, they can help make you aware of those things. So yeah, no, chat with a recruiter, get on their radar. If there are events that they think you'd be interested in, like they can direct you those ways. If there's like special programs or something, or affinity groups that are sponsoring some sort of session, like you can often get connected with those through a recruiter. So yeah, that'd kind of be my answer there. But yeah, I guess to reiterate, like recruiters don't interview you and they don't have the ability to refer you really, depending on the firm that you're at least I would not expect that for something like MBB or tier 1 firms. But they are a great resource. I chatted with recruiters pretty often during my process.
Okay, so in the case that if I got connected, but the recruiter has not responded yet, and it has been some time, to follow up, should I just like do a regular follow-up, or do I need to attach resume, like or like a cover letter, anything like that? Or is that not what they're looking for at that stage?
Probably depends a little bit on the firm, but I would, if it's the first time you're following up, I would just follow up with a normal email and just express that you're still interested and you would like more information.
Got it. Sweet.
Yeah, no problem. All right, quick pause just to plug this giveaway for the Management Consulting Bootcamp that we're hosting at Leland. For those who were not here at the beginning of the call, just wanted to let you know that we are hosting a Management Consulting Recruiting Bootcamp here at Leland. And you can use this course. We'll go walk through kind of every part of the recruiting process. We'll help you get a resume prepped. We'll help you get set up for casing really well. So if this is something you're interested in, we are giving away a seat to that boot camp at the end of this giveaway. So if you want to enter, you can use that bit.ly link there in order to enter. A few more details. This is kind of the course outline. We start with things that you need in order to get an interview. So resume, networking. Then we walk through the actual pieces of the case interview. So structuring, case prep for market sizing, brainstorming, and all the other intricacies there. We'll do some mock interviews. We do behavioral interviews. It is a great time. I'm actually in charge of boot camps here at Leland, and we have some really incredible coaches that are leading these sessions. Very experienced. A lot of them were interviewers at MBB firms, so they have a lot of insights. So if you're interested in entering, would encourage you to do that. Additionally, if you don't win a seat, by filling out that survey, you also become eligible for an exclusive discount that will drop the price from our $11.99 down to $6.99. So if you're interested, you will also have access to a discount code for enrolling in the course, even if you don't win that free seat. But that code will expire tonight, just so you have the deadline on your mind. Again, feel free to screenshot this if you'd like to enter to win. We'll announce that at the end of this boot camp, whoever won the giveaway. Awesome. All right, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's talk about resumes. Resumes can be a lot. I'd say particularly for non-traditional applicants, I think the main question on a lot of folks' minds are like, what am I supposed to put on here if I didn't go to like some fancy school and I don't have a finance degree and I didn't intern at like an investment bank or some other sort of financial institution? And valid questions. I asked them myself when I was recruiting. I was like, what do I put on this? What do I put on my resume? And so a couple of things that I want to walk through. First, this kind of high-level template of what a typical resume tends to look like. This is for someone who's still in school. I think the elements are still the same. You just rearrange them if you are more of an experienced applicant. So you'll start with education. Pretty straightforward. You'll list your school, when you graduated, or when your expected graduation date would be. You'll list the degree you pursued and your GPA. And then any academic highlights, like if you got a specific scholarship or you were part of an honor society or received any specific academic awards, things like that. You'll also include your standardized test scores. So when we're thinking about education, there are a couple standards that you want to try to hit. First, your GPA does need to be pretty good. Yeah, or shooting for a GPA above like a 3.7, I'd say 3.8. If you don't have a GPA that high, that is not the end all be all. I'd say if you have the opportunity to try to bring that a little bit higher, you should look at that if you can. But if you don't have a GPA above a 3.7, I would then try to look at your standardized test scores and see if you can boost those a bunch, or if there's other ways that you can kind of adjust for that. So for your standardized test scores, they are looking for kind of any standardized test score. So it could be your ACT that you took in high school. It could be your SAT. You could also include your GMAT or your GRE if you're in grad school right now and you took those tests in order to get into your grad program. And I would just include whichever test score is highest by like percentile. You're shooting to be like within like 95, 96th percentile at least. So for me, I put my ACT test score on there. And for ACT, like that's typically like the easiest test or standardized test that you'll have taken. And you can even go back and retake the ACT as someone who is in college. I knew people that went back as like sophomores and juniors in college to retake their ACT so they could get a higher score. And maybe to give you a sense of how high that score should be, you were looking for a score above 30. All right, let's talk about employment history. This is also fairly straightforward. It'll be, in terms of formatting, it'll be your job title, how long or the range for when you were employed there, where you were located, and then 2 to 3 bullets that highlight your accomplishments or the projects that you completed during your tenure in that job. It is not everything that you did during that job. It is the most high impact, the most important, most relevant things that you did during that time in that job. And you'll do this for your most recent experiences or professional experiences. Then you have a little section on service or leadership. Service and leadership are things that consulting firms are looking for. So these are typically nonprofit or clubs or things like that that you participated in and you did not get paid for. So they can be, I was a club president, or I led like this TA group, or I participated in this peer mentorship program and I was a leader here. Again, you'll provide details on the organization that you were with, your role title, where you did it, and a couple of bullets. And then this last piece, this is typically at the bottom of your resume. It's a couple lines. It's very small. It's just personal details. And these are brief highlights of kind of things that make you you. They can be hobbies. They can be accomplishments that aren't related to academics or any of the other 3 sections of your resume. So for mine, I talked about how I like to run half marathons. And I was like an ex-ballerina. And I think I also mentioned a piece about enjoying baking and said that I was like a cinnamon roll enthusiast, or like I like enjoyed baking and I had like an emphasis in cinnamon rolls or something like that. You can have a little bit of fun in the personal details. Probably make sure that it's not like too out there, but good to give like a little sense of what makes you you in that personal details piece. So that's high level what your resume looks like. Again, this is more geared towards someone who's recruiting out of school. If you have professional experience outside of school and you're not applying for a consulting job while you are in school, your education section will just drop below your employment history at that point. It'll be the second thing that you look at as opposed to the first, and you'll just want to start with your job history first. All right, couple keys. First, formatting and structure matters here. You want to have these sections. It should all fit on one page, and you should have pretty consistent spacing. So make sure that your margins are even, your bullets all look the same. Make sure that like your punctuation is consistent. The tense, like the verb tenses you're using are consistent, that sort of thing. You also want your resume to feel very active, very action oriented. So focus on active, punchy verbs. And then when you're thinking about the bullets themselves, you want to implement what it's like called the STAR framework. I think it's pretty well known, but if you're unfamiliar, this stands for situation, task, action, result. And so each bullet should be able to tell you what the situation was, what the task was that you were trying to do, how you accomplished that task, what action you took, and then what the result or the impact of that was. Every bullet should be able to tell that story very clearly and very briefly. So yeah, just that can take a while. And it's also helpful to review your resume with other people and ask them to kind of compare your bullet points against this framework and see if they can pick out what like the S, T, A, and R would be. And if they can't, that's a good sign that you probably need to rework that a little bit. Again, this is something that having a coach or someone who has experience with consulting resumes can be super valuable on, because they know, hey, this doesn't work, and they can give you advice on, here's how I'd rework this, here's how I think we can accomplish, like we can communicate all of these things really concisely, but also very clearly. Next thing, when you're looking at a resume, you either want to see like big names, as in like big company names, or big impact. And some folks think like, oh, okay, big names are probably more important than big impact. Take it from me. I had no big names on my resume, absolutely none. But I had made sure I crafted my resume in a way that clearly communicated the impacts that I drove in any sort of thing that I did, and why those impacts were big, why those impacts mattered, which takes me to my second bullet point. Try to quantify your impact or action as much as possible. There should be numbers everywhere in your resume. If you can quantify something, do it. And when I say quantify, you might be thinking, okay, that's putting like dollars. I'm going to tie everything to dollars. And dollars are great. I would recommend trying to tie things to dollars if you can. But you might not be able to do that for every experience that you had. I wasn't able to. So you need to think creatively about how you can quantify your impact. One example that I'd share with you from my resume that I used to apply was I spent time in a museums in their collections unit, and I was trying to sort stuff. It was part of my master's program, and I had figured out a way to improve the process for locating and then sorting various museum specimens. And I was like, okay, I definitely know that this made a huge impact on my research. It also had impacts on other research groups that were using these museum specimens. Like, how do I quantify this? And my thought was, well, it saved me a lot of time. So I'm going to figure out how I can calculate how much time I saved. So I said, okay, before I changed the system, it took me X amount of time. And after I fixed the system, it took me this much time. And so I calculated what the percent difference was. And I said, okay, like that means I achieved X percent efficiency. And cumulatively, it saved me like this much time, and probably like saved even other people even more time. And that's how I impacted it. So sometimes you have to think a little creatively about how to quantify things. Don't be afraid to think outside of the box, but do make sure that how you quantify something is defensible. Your math can be like a little scrappy, but I'd be prepared to be able to like talk someone through it and make sure that you can stand behind your calculation there. And then my last bullet point, especially for us non-traditional folks, do not shy away from sharing non-business experience. I can confidently tell you that 90% of my resume was biology stuff. I was talking through how I did research. I was talking through about how I taught classes. I was talking through how I did peer mentorship. I was talking about like presenting articles or getting research grants. None of that had anything to do with business directly, but I was able to translate my experience into things that felt relevant, that demonstrated that I was a leader, that demonstrated I could problem solve, that I was able to think about problems critically in order to find a solution quickly and also test things out. And those are the kinds of things that consulting firms are looking for. They're looking for someone who is competent, smart, can solve a problem, and is willing to lead. And you can do that with non-business experience. I'll pause really quick if there's any questions about resumes. The only thing I'll flag here is I'm not able to help you with like specific bullet points on your resume right now. If you do have a question, would appreciate it if you could keep it a little bit more general so it's broadly helpful to the rest of the group.
I have a question. So if you have like a non-technical, like non-quant background, and you're non-traditional, would putting a standardized test like a GRE be helpful, or something like an MBA math or like a course?
Needs to be a standardized test score. So it should absolutely be one of these four. It should be your ACT, it should be your SAT, your GMAT, or your GRE, whichever one's highest.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
And is that also for people with experience as well? So if you've been in the workforce for 4 years per se? Okay.
Yeah, it's always good to have a test score on there. Everyone that I know at least has had a test score on their resumes from my experience. Cool. All right, let's chat cover letters. Cover letters, people dread a cover letter, and I hear you. Cover letters can feel hard to write because I think our initial thought is I'm just going to figure out how to regurgitate my resume in paragraph form. And that is absolutely not the way to approach a cover letter. So similar exercise to the resume, I have kind of a high level template of what a cover letter looks like. You'll start at the top, you'll have your name, you'll have your contact information. That's typically like your address, your email, and your phone number, ways that they can contact you. And then you'll go with a salutation. That can be to whom it may concern. If you happen to know a specific person that your cover letter should be addressed to, you can address them. I'd say for most firms, you probably won't know who that person is. So it is okay if your salutation is not personalized to a specific person. I'd say that's probably most likely the case for most folks applying to consulting. And now let's think about paragraphs. Your first paragraph should provide a brief introduction to you. Again, like should really avoid summarizing your resume here. You should be trying to provide net new information that they don't get from your resume here. Here you also want to articulate your interest in the role. Paragraph 2. Here's where you kind of discuss your skills and you're going to provide brief examples of how you applied them. So you can express how you might apply them working as a consultant at this firm as well. So this is kind of, paragraph 2 is, so I guess from this point, paragraph 1 is saying, here's why I'm so interested in this role. Paragraph 2 is, here's why I'm so great. I'm so skilled. Like, here are the things that I know really well. And these should also be skills that do tie back to the kinds of skills that consulting firms are looking for. And then we drop to paragraph 3. Here you kind of highlight, like, here's what excites me about this specific firm that I'm applying to and what I'm excited to take advantage of in a role there or working there. Then you can close with like a brief, like, I'm looking forward to hearing back from you, something like that. And then you just close with your name. So cover letters are not long. Again, this is a page. It really shouldn't be like too much longer than 3 paragraphs. Like if you must have 4, like I'm sure that's fine. I stuck to the 3 paragraph model on all of mine. And then one last thing I want to add here is just like, it should be apparent throughout the letter that you're excited about the role, you're excited about the firm, and that you are a competent person with skills. Again, those skills should be like, I am quantitatively minded, I am a problem solver, I am a leader, and then probably also things about like, I work hard, I'm honest, things like that. You can also use your cover letter to explain parts of your resume that you think might, I don't know, tarnish your image. Feels very dramatic to me. But let's say you have a GPA that maybe isn't quite a 3.7. If there's an extenuating circumstance that reasonably explains why your GPA might be lower and can explain why you're still a great hiring option in spite of that, you can handle that in your cover letter here. Again, like you really don't want to be reiterating your resume though. Like it should feel very distinct. It should feel like it's giving net new information from your resume. So some quick keys to a great cover letter. This is a firm's first look at your written communication skills. So this should be like pretty airtight writing. Your grammar should be excellent. Your verb choice should feel, again, very active, very consistent, that sort of thing. Do not rehash your resume here. Optimize for structure, clarity, and brevity. Convey your why. Why are you excited about this firm? Why would you be a great hire? And then sell the skills, perspectives, and achievements you'd bring. The last thing I'd add here as well is you should not use the same cover letter for each firm because every firm is different. And if it feels super generic and it feels like you could send this one to any firm, it means you haven't made it specific enough and you haven't tailored it to the specific firm you're interested in. So do some research on the firms that you're planning to apply to before you write your cover letters so it can feel tailored. Last little tidbit I can speak to for MBB firms specifically is that Bain really cares about the cover letter. McKinsey does not require one. I did not submit a cover letter for McKinsey. And then for BCG, the vibe from most people that I've talked to, and in my experience, it was kind of optional. You can use it if you want. But I think it doesn't hurt to send in a cover letter if you're worried about it or if it's unclear to you. And I do think I'm going to speed quite along. I'm good to go a little bit over, but I do want to make sure that we can get through the rest of our content. So if you do have other questions, hold on to those and I'll try to tackle them at the end. So let's talk about interviewing. I think this is what most people think about when they're thinking about preparing and recruiting for a consulting role. You will typically face 3 different types of interviews, and I've outlined them here. So the first is the case interview. I think this is the quintessential like consulting interview. These interviews are just basically assessing your problem solving skills and then kind of testing your ability to problem solve live and with a time constraint. They're typically geared around some sort of business problem that's simulated, and you will break down that business problem and arrive at some sort of recommendation or solution. That's case interviewing. You also have behavioral interviews. At McKinsey, this is called like the PEI. And these are assessing more soft skills and they're gauging your cultural fit with the firm. So these are often very geared around like, tell me about a time when blah, 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 or they're tied to a firm's specific values or what they're looking for in a candidate. So you need to be able to present personal experience really clearly and in a kind of relevant, easy to relate to way. And the third kind of type of interview would be screeners. These are games, they can be Pymetrics, they can be case robots, and they test problem-solving skills and some soft ones. And so the format can vary by firm, but they're kind of testing like your ability to problem solve. They can be puzzles. They can also be conversations with a chat bot. They're typically virtual. They can be async. You're not doing them with a live interviewer, that sort of thing. But I want to talk a little bit more about case interviews. This is what most folks are thinking about. And again, when you are prepping for a consulting job, most of your time is spent on case interviewing. And when you are thinking about what the actual case interview looks like, it is looking at trying to do all 5 of these steps most of the time in 25 minutes or less. You do not have a long time to do a case interview. And let's talk about like what those components typically look like. So like I said, there's typically 5 main parts of a case interview. It starts with structuring. Can you break a problem down into smaller pieces? Case math. Can you perform calculations to better understand a problem or better understand a solution? Can you do those math calculations quickly and accurately. Brainstorming, can you think creatively about a problem? Can you come up with a lot of different ideas for solutions? Can you explain them? Can you come up with a lot of different ideas for like a customer and like what you might want to do for a customer? Things like that. Data analytics, if I showed you data, could you draw insights from that data and reasonable conclusions from those insights? This is data literacy. And then finally, recommendation. After you've done steps 1 through 4, can you deliver to your interview a really clear summary of what you've solved and what the solution would be and like what that looks like? So I have some examples for each of these steps here. So when you're thinking about structuring a problem, let's say the scenario is a shop is experiencing declining sales. Like, how would you help them identify the cause and find a solution? So for this one, I would just think about, okay, what are some ways that like a shop could be experiencing these kinds of declining sales? And like, what kind of levers could I look at to try to find a solution? So it could be like, let me look at external factors, like the market. Are there any market trends that I should be aware of that might be helpful to look at? Should I look at barrier to entry or competition, things like that? You could look at internal factors, like how are we pricing things? What does our revenue look like versus our cost? Are there any like efficiency problems that we could solve? And maybe a third one would be like, okay, our shop's experiencing declining sales. Maybe our customer is looking for something different. Like, what's our product market fit? Are we addressing the needs of our customers? That's one way to structure a problem. And the great part about case interviews is that structure that you said at the beginning of your case never really goes away. The rest of your case should be incredibly structured, very easy to follow, very easy to explain. So let's talk about number 2, case math. Case math is testing whether you can perform calculations quickly and accurately, right? So an example would this be, they'll give you numbers to work with. So an example, again, this is a very simple example, is a gym has 2,000 active users who pay some amount of monthly payment for a pass. If the gym has this amount in costs, how profitable are they now? In order to solve something like this, I need to know the formula for profit, which is revenue minus costs. And I need to be able to calculate what profit would be. But if I'm asked to identify like how much more profitable they would be if they implemented a $2 increase in the gym pass cost, like I also need to be able to calculate what the difference would look like and what that translates to. Right? Brainstorming. This is often like an open-ended question where it's like, hey, a company's trying to do this. What ideas would you suggest? And you could just go off trying to come up with as many as possible. They should be relevant. They should be tied to the question, but you can be pretty creative here and think outside the box. I think thinking outside the box is actually great. I think a lot of people are like quite delighted by it, actually. And that was feedback that I got when I was interviewing. And I think especially as a non-traditional applicant, you do have unique perspectives that maybe someone who is coming from a more traditional business background may not have. So really lean into that. For data analytics, it's like I said, if I showed you a bar graph illustrating monthly sales by category, could you draw some sort of insights? Like, oh, okay, this one seems low. This would indicate why. This category seems really high, or this one seems like it stayed the same the entire time. Maybe we could do something here, or I'd want to understand more about why growth seems stagnant. Those are the kinds of insights that you draw from data analytics. You need to be able to draw those quickly, and you also need to be able to make sure that they are still like relevant and reasonable insights and conclusions that you can draw. And then finally, recommendation. The classic example that you might run into while you are practicing casing is like the prompt would be something like, the CEO of our client is joining our meeting in 3 minutes. What is your final recommendation? Or sometimes it's like the CEO is walking down the hall into our meeting, like prepare your final recommendation. And so at this point, you'll take a couple seconds to think through, okay, the problem was this. We looked at X, Y, Z to understand the problem better. We decided on looking more at Y in order to find solutions. Thinking about solutions, we came up with A, B, C. I think C is the best solution because of this. If we implemented C, this would be the impact, this would be the end result. That is the formula for a recommendation. And if you've structured your case well, it should be very easy to come up with what your recommendation should be. And you should be able to arrive at it like very, very soon. So all this to say, lots to do in a case interview. If you're structured, you will do yourself like such like, it's so good. It's so good to be structured. You can move faster. You get less confused. Your math will be better. You'll be able to keep stuff straight. You'll be able to bring your interviewer along with you during the process. And I think the other thing that I want to point out here is all 5 of these things can be perfected and drilled and practiced independently of the others. So if you're great at structuring, but you need help on case math, like drill case math, like come up with ways to practice your case math. If you need help on brainstorming, just practice coming up with a bunch of different ideas. If you need help doing recommendations, like come up with simple problems and then practice walking through them and coming up with a solution at the end. I think the last thing I'd call out here is like a huge part of the case interview, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, is making sure that your interviewer is coming along with you during the interview. At no point should your interviewer feel like they don't understand what you're doing. So while you are practicing casing, you should practice doing all of this like out loud. Practice thinking through or speaking through what you are thinking through. Be really comfortable articulating, well, I'm seeing this and that makes me think of this. And so I'm going to do that. Like that is how you should be thinking. That is how you should be speaking while you are doing a case interview. So again, some last little tips here. Practice, practice, practice. You will be bad at casing the first time you do it, most likely. Most people are pretty bad at it. It is very different than interviewing for other types of companies. It is very prescriptive. It's very, it's very structured, which is great because it means it can be perfected. It can be practiced. I would shoot a goal to practice like 3 or 4, maybe 5 cases a week. If you're really serious about preparing for case interviews, make a schedule for where you want to be and stick to it. So for me, what that looked like is I was like, okay, by month 3, I want to be like 70% case ready. Like I want to feel like pretty good about casing. And so I was doing multiple cases a week. I was doing cases on my own. I was doing cases with others, which is tip number 3. Incorporate a combination of self-study with a group or one-on-one practice cases. Being able to drill and narrow in on things that you're bad at is super helpful. It could give you opportunity to get super sharp. For me, mental math was not my strongest suit while I was interviewing. And so I came up with little mini math drills and I would practice them while I was on the train going to my internship. And I got great at case math. So don't underestimate the power of a drill, which is tip number 2. Do full case interviews to make sure that you can do the full thing and make sure that you supplement with drills. My big recommendation for this is while you are doing full cases, keep a tracker of errors in like a spreadsheet or a notebook so that you can keep track of things that you're bad at. And when you know what you're bad at, you can fix those things. So just make note of like, oh, I didn't think that went very well. Oh, I think that I was bad at this or I made an error on this sort of math problem. I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix that. And you can use drills to target your weak areas. And last but not least, like I think casing can be so fun. I really enjoyed casing when I got comfortable with it. It was uncomfortable at first. I wasn't great at it, but I practiced enough where I felt super comfortable. Like, and they were exciting. I was like, oh, you know, like I'm going to sit down and I'm going to solve this problem for some hypothetical pasta company. And I went and solved their problem and it felt great and it was exciting and it's fun to feel like you're solving a problem. It was satisfying to feel like I arrived at a solution that felt pretty good for only 25 minutes of work. And I think you'll get there too. But like I said, your first cases will be slow. If they are bad, do not be discouraged. That just means you need to practice a little bit more and you will definitely get to a point where you feel super comfortable. And that's kind of it for me for content. I do want to quickly announce our giveaway winner. That was just pinged to me. And that was Desi. I was good to chat with you earlier today. Congrats. You won the seat to our giveaway.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I will reach out to you. I'll send you a note or you can send me a note and we can get you set up with that. For folks who are not, who unfortunately did not win the giveaway, I'm sorry. Just keep in mind that you do have a discount code to our bootcamp if you are interested in redeeming it. And with that, would love to take any lingering questions. Again, my main advice here would just be try to make them a little bit more broad so that they're helpful for a broader group as opposed to just your specific circumstance, but would love to be helpful here.
How important is actually adding the GPA to like your resume? Like, can they essentially decide they're not interested solely based on that, or like how much power does it actually hold?
GPA has quite a bit of power. I will say this, like if you have multiple degrees, I would include the GPA of your most recent degree. So like on my resume, I had a master's, so I included my master's GPA. So not like you have to list, and you're not listing your high school GPA, obviously, but GPA does matter. I'd say, obviously, like you want that to be as high as possible. And if you feel like your GPA is not like super close to the target, I don't think that's, like my move wouldn't be like, oh, I guess I'm just not going to do it anymore. Like that's obviously like not the right move, but I would think, okay, my GPA might not be where I want it to be. I'm going to think through how I can compensate for that, whether that's with a higher, better ACT score. Again, like take the ACT as a college student, take the ACT as someone who's like a couple years into your like degree, like get a higher one, get a perfect score. That's awesome. But yeah, I'd look for ways to like compensate for that. And again, like you can use your cover letter strategically to help people understand why numbers may look the way that they look on your resume.
And is cover letter and resume something that the bootcamp goes more in depth?
Okay. Yep, we will go over resumes and cover letters.
Is it worse to put a low GPA on your resume or to not put it on at all?
Oh, I'll be honest on this one. I'm not sure what the best answer to that would be. As someone like I never screened resumes. That's something that they typically, I think a lot of firms actually do use like a screener, like a robot screener to look at your resumes. I'd say if you don't have a resume, if you don't have a GPA on your resume, that feels like a red flag to me. The only reason I'd say that is because if you don't have a GPA on your resume, my initial thought would be this person did not think their GPA was high enough to include, so they're not putting it on here. And it kind of, to me, feels like you're, like it would kind of lead the screener to assume the worst. They're like, oh, like that GPA must like, it must have like a 1. When like maybe you don't have a 1, like maybe you have like a 3.1. And like a 3.1 is better than a 1.0 GPA, obviously. So I would include your GPA. But again, take that with a grain of salt as someone who did not personally screen resumes.
Hi, what are your thoughts on using like AI to help you write the cover letters or something like that?
It's a great question. I think AI is really bad at writing. I would not use AI. That said, I think AI can be a helpful tool when you're trying to brainstorm or outline your resume or your cover letter. I have read AI writing, and it just, you can tell that it is not human. It sounds a little awkward. I also think AI does not know everything about you, and so it cannot supply rich detail, and it cannot tell a story about you the same way that you could. And so I would encourage you to use AI to help you outline. Use AI to kind of bounce ideas back and forth if you're trying to iterate on something or come up with a better way to say something. But I would not rely on AI to like even review a cover letter. We're not there yet with AI. So use it as a tool. Do not rely on it. Do not use it as a crutch. I would encourage you to really spend time crafting your resume, crafting your cover letter yourself.
Hi, sorry, I had 2 quick questions. First, going back to the GPAs, what are your thoughts on what people do with rounding GPA? So if you have like a 6.7 rounding up to like a 3.7. And then the second one was how much value do screeners or interviewers put on like certifications like CPA, CFAs, and stuff like that?
Good question. For GPAs, my thought here, again, as someone who did not screen resumes, if you're like, a 3.69. Like, I think you could probably pretty comfortably round that up to a 3.7. 3.66 feels maybe a little too far away from a 3.7, just in terms of weighting. So if you're worried about being able to round, maybe just like leave both digits after the decimal is my thought. But again, take that as a grain of salt, as someone who did not screen resumes. And then to your other point about certifications, I think they can be helpful. I think they're worth including. I wouldn't build entire sections of your resume around it. So for example, if you got a CFA as part of like a professional work experience, I wouldn't have like a CFA be a standalone section of your professional experience portion of your resume. Maybe that can be like a bullet under education. It could be a personal detail depending on how you choose to spin it. But yeah, worth putting in there. I just don't think you want to overload your resume with like, here are all these qualifications that I had. Another thing, like some qualifications are not worth mentioning. Like if you are Microsoft Suite certified, sorry, like that is not what they're looking for. I think at this point, a lot of consulting firms expect you to be proficient in Word and like PowerPoint or Excel, like, or at least to the point where they think you can use those things. So I'd be selective with what you put on in terms of awards and achievements to make sure that they are communicating that you actually have like a great skill set and you're not just trying to compensate with like a ton of things that maybe are like a little lower impact. I'll take one more question if there is one. Other than that, I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. There was one question about work-life balance. Great question. I'd say a lot of the stereotypes that you hear about consulting are true. You work very long hours. And if that feels intimidating, I think that's normal. I don't think those work hours are exciting for everyone, but they are worth it for a lot of people. I learned a lot. I worked incredibly hard, but I grew a ton. But I did not sleep a whole lot while I was a consultant. I think you have to work really hard to set boundaries and make sure that you are taking care of yourself while you work this job, because any consulting firm will take what it can from you. If you are willing to give them more hours, they will take those hours. So it's worth communicating with your teams, communicating with your managers, and setting expectations, reasonable expectations. The work still has to get done, obviously, but yeah, people can manage their life and do well and have a good and healthy career in consulting, but it is a lot of work. I will be very transparent about that.
Sorry, with that being said, did you have to work weekends and stuff? I'm just trying to compare how, or like, I'm trying to see how that compares to like public accounting at a Big Four, because I have the same experience in my job currently, so like long hours is not an issue, but like I'm just wondering like how comparable that is.
Yeah, I think this can vary a little bit by firm. I will say, like, it was not uncommon for me to work late on a Friday, so I did not have to work on Saturday and Sunday. Some folks choose to do that a little bit differently. Some people are like, nope, I want off early on a Friday, and so I am going to work a little bit on Saturday and Sunday to make sure that the work still gets done. I'd also say it's pretty common for folks to hop on and check their email and like make sure they're set up for the work week on a Sunday night. Oh, the lights in our office just went out. So I don't think that's uncommon, but I think like most firms do not expect you to work on a weekend. I'd say you can expect to still be able to like do fun things on the weekend. And I didn't work late every Friday night, but it is kind of I guess the main point I'd say there is like the work still has to get done. And so you just have to figure out how it gets done and make that decision yourself.
Fair enough. So pretty similar.
Yeah. Alrighty, folks. That is it for me in terms of time. These were great questions. Super appreciate your input on this. And thanks so much for joining. This was a great session. Like I mentioned, if you are interested in working with a coach, would love to work with you, would love to learn more about what you're trying to accomplish. You can find me on Leland's coaching site. My name's Ellie N. You can schedule a 15-minute intro call with me. And great to see you. Enjoy the rest of your evenings.
And sorry, in terms for the bootcamp win thing, do we connect on like Leland, or how should I go about it?
I'll email you. I'll send you a
Okay,
message.
sounds